This is Trial Transcripts Exposed by Crime in Court with Heather. Raw courtroom reads with my commentary. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Crime in Court with Heather. This is Trial Transcripts Exposed. We are reading through the Menendez brothers' second trial. On the stand currently is Erik Menendez, the defendant, and we are going to continue in just a second with where we left off. We're starting on part 60, so this is a new day. I believe it's January 4th, but before we do, I want to thank my founding, you know what, let me move this a little closer so you guys can hear me better. Founding Justice Insiders, thank you for being founding Justice Insiders. You too can be a founding Justice Insider if you join as a Justice Insider between now and June 30th. You will receive the designation as a founding Justice Insider, and you will get your names read on at the beginning of every episode, or at least until it becomes too much, and then you'll get like a rolling credit or something. But your names do appear on screen, and I'm reading them now. So thank you. Toyota Girl 67, SLB 29488. May the Force be with you 4313. Jessica Wienand 6079. Mrs. Apples 2007. Butler 89833, thank you. Brooke JF, Jen P773, Boom Chicka Wow Wow 1, my favorite to say, and Kendall B5757. Thank you all for your founding memberships. And like I said, you too can have your name read on screen if you join as a Justice Insider between now and June 30th, you'll be designated a founding Justice Insider if you join between now and June 30th. All right, so let us get to our main topic here. We are going to continue where we left off, which was here we go. So we are on June 4th. I'm sorry, January 4th. Why do I keep my brain says one thing, my mind, my tongue says another, so apologies. And I just did a 4-hour read through of a Turtle Boy motion to dismiss, so I'm gonna be tired. I'm probably gonna split this, not split it, but like I myself will appear probably in a different clothing, different hair tomorrow, recording more of this just because I don't know if I'm going to have time to read through all of this or if my tongue will allow it. So, with that, and let's get started. So, oh, and like I said, there's going to be a lot of arguments, but now we're getting to like the end of the end of the defense's case, and what they want to put in, what they can and can't put in, what there's a lot of arguments between the evidence, between the state and the defense, and we're gonna hear a lot of it, go over a lot of it as the trial continues. There's going to be many moments of arguments outside the presence of the jury, just so you know, and that's how we are going to begin the day. So January 4th, 1996. Following proceedings were held outside the presence of the jury. The court says, okay, everybody is here without the jury. There are some matters that counsel wanted to discuss before the jury comes in. Mr. Levin says, yes, Your Honor. With respect to the scope of the questions that the prosecution is going to be allowed to, with respect to Mr. Cignarelli, I want to be ensured that Mr. Khan is not going to make any reference to the BBC. There are other matters contained in the tape in which Mr. Cignarelli refers to Lyle Menendez and infers that Erik Menendez may be scared of Lyle Menendez. We want litigation with respect to limitation of those statements made by Mr. Cignarelli for which there was no response by Erik Menendez or no adoption of it. Further, that if Mr. Khan should ask a question that is not contained in Mr. Cignarelli's former testimony or Mr. Menendez's former testimony, or that which is not contained on the November 29th, 89 tape, I do not want to make an objection that in some ways tips the jury off that it's based on testimony of Mr. Cignarelli. My intention is to just merely state objection and say that the question is being made in bad faith and have the court determine. The court says, well, let's do it this way. You can ask to approach, make it more neutral. Every time they ask to approach, Judge Stick Up His Ass says no. So why would. Now the court is like, just ask to approach. No big deal. Every time we ask to approach, sir, you tell us no. Hmm, that's interesting. Okay, Mr. Levin says, I will do that based on the court's suggestion. The court says yes, therefore, neither side is influenced by the objection. Mr. Levin says, I just want to have some process to which I am alerting the court that I don't believe it's contained in the source Mr. Khan is limited to. Mr. Gessler, for Lyle, chimes in and says, I would join in that procedure. Mr. Levin says, I'm sorry, Mr. Gessler, also, with respect to the screenplays, I reviewed those in detail last night. There is no mention that I found that has been alluded to in this trial thus far. There is no mention of the word probate or executor, and I have found no door that's been opened for the introduction of those screenplays. See what's happening? The state is saying, you guys open the door for all this stuff that we already pre-litigated wasn't going to come in. But now you open the door, so now we get to bring it in. But did they actually open the door, or is it just, yeah, them being really difficult? The court says, okay. Mr. Levin says, that's just merely my opinion. Mr. Gessler says, since Lyle Menendez is also involved third hand in this Craig Cignarelli testimony that was only before Erik's jury the last time, I would join in that procedure without waiving any 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendment objections that I stated yesterday, the analogy to Douglas versus Alabama. I still would go along with the procedure then if we make sure that there is no hint to the jury that this was done in prior testimony. However, there is a second problem that arises independently regarding the so-called tape conversation at Gladstone's, which I believe the prosecution also intends to go into. Am I correct about that, Mr. Khan? Mr. Khan says, we indicated yesterday we intend to question Mr. Menendez concerning admissions that he made, statements that he made to Craig Cignarelli. Now, some of those may refer to conversations in Gladstone's. I don't know what the source of it is. But we are going to question the defendant concerning statements he made to Craig Cignarelli. Mr. Gessler says, the problem I have is, are we talking about admissions he made on the stand at the last trial as to what he told Craig Cignarelli there and his explanations to him, or are we talking about, did you say this, and then in reference to the tape that was played at that particular proceeding? The court says, as I understood yesterday, you intended to ask him about things that he admitted in his earlier testimony. Mr. Khan says, that's correct, Your Honor. Mr. Gessler says, and the testimony only then. Mr. Khan says, that's correct. The court says, the only denials would be things that were testified to by Craig Cignarelli the first trial that he denied in his testimony in the first trial? Yes, says Mr. Khan. Ms. Abramson says, without reference to the fact that Cignarelli testified? Mr. Khan says, right. Mr. Gessler says, I particularly am concerned about the places in the tape in which it's Craig Cignarelli doing the talking and Erik simply getting him to back off the subject into drawing suspicion away from him, particularly those places where Craig talks about being afraid of Lyle, and I think that that is totally irrelevant and under 352 should be excludable. The one major area that was gone into after that statement at the last trial was a talk about anybody who would turn in Lyle because basically anyone who would turn in Lyle basically is the bravest man in the world and what he meant by those discussions. I think that also should be excludable under 352. The court says that was Cignarelli saying that. Mr. Gessler said, basically, Cignarelli and Erik were having a conversation about being the bravest person, anybody who would turn him in. It starts with Craig talking about Erik. Are you still scared of Lyle? And Erik saying, no, Lyle didn't do it. He was with me. And then it gets into Craig saying, "Let me tell you this, I'm scared of Lyle," basically, which again is totally irrelevant here. And then it goes into, and this is at page B17 on the DA's transcript of the taped conversation, is about Erik saying, "Man, I wouldn't be surprised if someone came out, if he actually did do it, and actually someone came out and said he'd do it." And Craig saying, "Yeah, then they'd be going." And Erik saying, "The bravest human being in the entire world." And Craig said, "I remember Princeton." I think that's totally irrelevant and immaterial to the proceeding. Court says, "Did you intend to go into that?" "No," says Mr. Khan. The court says, "Okay, let me ask, does the prosecution intend to refer to the BBC?" "No," says Mr. Khan. Court says, "All right. As far as the screenplay, did you intend to go into that this morning, or did you want to argue it, or how do you want to proceed?" Mr. Khan says, "Well, we would argue it further. We don't have to get into it this morning." Court says, "Okay, then if there is nothing else, we'll have the jury come out." Ms. Abramson says, "Your Honor, sometime today I would like to go into the issue of Lyle Menendez's testimony." The court says, "Sure." She asked for that last time, or the other day, and he never came back to it, of course. All right, so the court is now back, and he says, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're ready to resume with the trial. The defendant, Erik Menendez, is on the witness stand, still being cross-examined. I will remind you, you're still under oath. You may continue the cross-examination." Mr. Khan says, "Thank you." So Erik resumes the witness stand, and Mr. Khan asks, "Mr. Menendez, Craig Cignarelli, you indicated, was a close friend of yours?" "When I lived in Calabasas, we went to the same school. He was probably my closest friend at the school." "And sometime after you killed your parents, did you talk to Craig Cignarelli about buying a home in Beverly Hills for $8 million?" "I think at that point we were talking about ideas of investments or such things, and I said there is a home in Beverly Hills that, if bought, would be a great investment, but I didn't tell him that I intended to buy the home." "So one of the ideas that you were having was the idea of purchasing an $8 million home, is that correct?" "Right, it was. It was my friend's house, and my friend, his father owned the house, and I was talking about how it was a good investment." "I take it that's something that you weren't able to do when you were getting $180 a month from your mother in allowance, was it?" "It was something that I only thought of doing when my Uncle Brian started talking to me about how to invest and go into real estate in order to best invest your money." Which would have taken place, those conversations all would have taken place after Jose and Kitty are dead. So he's taking career advice from Uncle Brian and getting clobbered by the prosecution for it, basically. All right, next question. Well, after you killed your parents, you began to have a lot of ideas about investing money. Is that correct? Right. I was getting a lot of advice and I had to make a lot of decisions. And yes. What kind of decisions did you have to make? What to do with the money when it came in, whether to go into real estate with my Uncle Brian or my cousin Henry, to go into investing it in stock brokerage with my Aunt Martha. I didn't know what to do with it. And just getting a lot of different advice and thinking about different things. Was one of the ideas that you had forming a group of 4 people who would make $1 to $2 million in income? No, that was not an idea that I was intending to do. Weren't you talking about, weren't you specifically talking about forming a group of people that would be able to make that type of money, income? Right. That was with Craig Cignarelli when he had a wiretap on when he was talking to me in a restaurant, and in the conversation I was trying to tell him that I didn't trust him, and there were a lot of reasons why I said that, but it wasn't because that's what I intended to do. Well, can you tell us why you were talking to Craig Cignarelli about forming a group of 4 people that would make $1 to $2 million? Because I was in this conversation with him. I had already told Craig about 2 months earlier that I was responsible for my parents' deaths, and then I realized that that had been a mistake. And I told him at that time that no, I was not responsible. And then I was hearing up in Santa Barbara that he was telling people that I had told him this. And I felt I wanted to convince him in every way possible not to go to the police, that I was not responsible, and that I did not trust him. And I think what I was referring to in that passage is that I wouldn't want to betray this group. And I was trying to say that I don't trust him and that I think he's talking to the police. I don't know what he, I didn't know that he was wiretapping me. So you were saying that you were trying to persuade during that meeting Craig Cignarelli not to go to the police. Is that correct? More than that, I was trying to convince him that what I had said to him was not true, that certainly I did not do this, and so that he would not go to the police. And what did you previously tell Craig Cignarelli? I had told Craig the room, I had told Craig the room that my parents died in, how the police thought that they were killed, how I didn't think that that was right, and I told him how I thought that they came through not the back doors but the side, and I just told him that I did it. I didn't give him any real detail. I didn't give him any detail. I said I'm the one that did this, and I did that so that I just needed to tell people. I needed to hear that I wasn't a bad person. Craig's response was, "You're lying." And I said, "No, I didn't do it. I'm not being serious." So you admitted that sometime after you killed your parents, you told Craig Cignarelli that you had killed your parents. Is that correct? Yes, I did. How many people in the world did you trust with that information that you had killed your parents? Objection vague as to time. Rephrase the question, says the court. Well, from the time that you killed your parents up until the time that you were arrested in March of 1990, how many people did you entrust with the information that you had killed your parents? What do you mean by entrust? How many people did I tell? Yes. I told Craig Cignarelli, I told Dr. Oziel, and I, by and large, told my cousin Peter. You told your cousin Peter? When did you tell your cousin Peter? I didn't tell him flat out that I did it, but I told him. I'm not asking you what you told him, I'm asking you when you told him. Objection, he hasn't completed his answer. He was asking a different question, says the court. The witness says, I told him sometime when I was in Florida, I think in October or September. You told your cousin Peter in October or September? Yes. Of 89 that you had killed your parents. No, I gave the impression that I was responsible, trying to see what he would say about that because he's a very religious person and I was trying to get a sense of how he felt and what would that make that person as a person if someone had done this. And so I largely alluded to it and he was catching on, so I moved the subject away. All right, but I am talking about outright admission that you had killed your parents. How many people in this world did you tell that to from the time that you killed your parents up until the time that you were arrested in March of 1990? Two. When you told Craig Cignarelli, when was it that you admitted to him that you had killed your parents? I told him that in September, in the first weeks in September. And you also told him that, Mr. Levin says, could we get a year on that, Your Honor? Yes. Mr. Khan says, September of 89? Yes, says the witness. Mr. Levin says, thank you. Mr. Khan says, and you also told him that your brother was responsible for the killing of your parents, too. Is that correct? Right. I said that it was both of us. Where were you when you made this admission to him? I was in my I was in the house in Beverly Hills. And you told Craig Cignarelli at that time that you were coming back from a movie and that you were going inside to get a fake identification to go out to the bars. Is that correct? Objection. Argumentative as phrased. Overruled. Erik says, I think what I first told him was what I told the police happened that night, that I was out of at the movie and that I had been to I think probably said I had been to Taste of LA and then I was coming home to get my ID because we were going to this restaurant to meet a friend and that's when I had found my parents. That's what I first told him. Just before I told him that I did it, I told him that first. So first you lied to him like you lied to other people. Is that correct? Yes. All right. Now, when you got to the point where you began to admit to Craig Cignarelli that you and your brother had in fact killed your parents, did you tell Craig Cignarelli that you were coming from a movie? That you went inside to get a fake ID to go to the bars and then you went outside your home? Did you begin by telling him that? I don't, I wouldn't have said bars. I didn't drink. And I don't know why I would have said being by going outside the home. No, I didn't say that. And you didn't drink. I began drinking some after my parents died, but before I just didn't like the taste of alcohol. Why did you have a phony identification showing that you were over the age of 21? It was the only way to get into nightclubs when I went dancing with my girlfriend, Kirsten. Well, isn't that what you told Craig Cignarelli that you went inside to get a fake ID to go out to a bar? I guess if he's referring to it was the Cheesecake Factory, a restaurant where we were supposed to meet Perry that night. There is a bar attachment to it. Okay, so that might be. And did you tell Craig Cignarelli that after you went outside after getting your fake ID, your brother Lyle was standing there with two guns and said, "Let's do it"? No, I never said that. You did not say that to Craig Cignarelli. No. Did you tell Craig Cignarelli that you then walked inside the house and you went up to the door on the left, which was slightly open? Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, I have an objection at this point and ask to approach. All right, says the court, you may do that. The one time he allows them to approach because he told them to. The following proceedings were held at the bench, so we've got a sidebar here. Court says, yes. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, I object to the manner in which Mr. Khan is phrasing his questions, coupled with his mannerisms and the way in which he is making it appear that he is reading from testimony which is in contravention to the court's order yesterday, that Mr. Khan is not to infer that this is based on former testimony. He is doing everything but saying he's got former testimony. He is standing up there and methodically looking down at a transcript paging through it as he's reading it. Court says, I don't know what he's looking at. I don't know that he's looking at a transcript page. He is looking at something and is reading, or I can't say he's reading either. He is speaking slowly and looking down at a document. It does not appear from what he is looking at, or one cannot draw the impression or conclusions that he is reading from a transcript. He is referring to something. It's in writing, whether it's his notes or something else. It's anybody's guess as to what it is. But there is no impression that this is testimony that he is referring to. He is not asking questions and answers and not referring to any of the testimony. And so far, this tracks the substance of what Cignarelli did testify to in the first trial. So, Mr. Levin says, I agree with that. But what I disagree with is the manner in which Mr. Khan is doing it. It's giving the impression that it's based on former testimony, and Mr. Khan can ask these questions, but do so in a manner that does not infer that it's based on the testimony of Craig Cignarelli. Mr. Gessler says, I would join in that objection, Your Honor, and the basis is something that the transcript will never show because all it shows is the words which, as you have correctly pointed out, track Craig Cignarelli's testimony. But as Mr. Levin has pointed out too, he is looking down as though he were reading from something. Now, we have seen Mr. Khan in cross-examination for over a week now. The jurors are well acquainted with his style of questioning. When he is freelancing, he is looking up. He's following the question with a question. He is speaking in reasonably rapid fire as far as the reporter can still get it down. But it's an obvious question and answer in cross-examination style. When in the past he has been impeaching from transcripts or setting up somebody for impeachment from a transcript, he has read deliberately from the transcript in exactly the style which he is using this morning. The jurors are not that dumb, Your Honor. They understand. I think the difference in style between free form here is questions from my notes. Here is questions from my notes. Here's where I'm going to go versus something which is written down in some formal document, not necessarily a transcript, perhaps a police report, but giving the indication that someplace out there, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if I could just show you, is this very statement that I am reading in this slow form to the witness. That's my objection, which, as I say, would not appear on the cold record for review, but it's very deliberately done to infer that the jury, that Mr. Khan has a source for these very words that he is now asking. The court says, well, I don't conclude that that is the purpose of what he is doing. I do agree that he is asking the questions in a slow, methodical fashion, but bear in mind that the court has placed certain constraints on what he can ask, and he has to confine himself to what it was that Cignarelli testified to in the first trial. And if he varies from that, we will then have Mr. Levin jump up and ask to approach and have another discussion. So far, my impression is that Mr. Khan is trying to comply with the court's order by referring to what he's referring to, notes of what it was Cignarelli testified to in the first trial, or the actual transcript. The purpose is to confine himself to that which the court has ruled inadmissible. Mr. Gessler says, although that's all true, Your Honor, Mr. Khan has displayed himself to be a brilliant man. I think we all know that he could freeform these questions with exactly the words that he is trying to use without looking down and speaking in the slow, measured speech as though he is reading from something else. I think Mr. Khan certainly has displayed the ability to be able to do that when he wants to. We all know that we all know that he from him, and I would ask that he do that in this proceeding rather than pretending to be reading from some other document. The court says, Mr. Khan says, well, I just want to get an accurate, and the jury can't determine whether it's a transcript or just notes or just a report or some sort or whatever it is. So once again, I think that the prosecution may not refer to the facts that it's testimony, and I'm not going to do that. Court says, I will say this in contradiction to Mr. Gessler's remarks. During the cross examination, to a greater extent, Mr. Khan has been referring to notes. He goes back and forth, looks at notes, and then when there is some dispute about what somebody has said, then he goes to the notebook and pulls out a notebook and a separate document altogether from what he uses during the examination of a witness. Right now, he is using a procedure he has used in the examination of this and other witnesses without transcript. It doesn't appear to me that anyone could draw the conclusion he is referring to a transcript from what he's doing. He is just being careful. Mr. Levin says, I would ask that the court instruct the jury that there should be no inference drawn from the questions asked by Mr. Khan that it is based on any former testimony. Ms. Abramson says, no, you don't want to ring that bell. Don't ring that bell. The court says, yeah, you are. Mr. Gessler says, I would rather not have that instruction at this point. Mr. Levin says, I withdraw it. The court says, bear in mind, as I told you before or yesterday, the jury will be instructed at the end of the case that questions are not evidence and only have relevance as to what the answer is. If he answers no, then that's the evidence. The answer is no. Mr. Gessler says, they said that in Lo Signo and Douglas too, Your Honor. The court says, but those were bad faith cases. Those were cases where there was no ability by the prosecution to prove up what they were asking. Here, there is ability. Mr. Gessler says, but it's our opinion that it's bad faith. The court says, we've already put that on the record. Let's resume here. So again, nothing gets resolved. He doesn't get admonished for reading, and we're just going to keep on keeping on. Miss Abramson says, Your Honor, could we approach again for just a moment? The court says, sure. Just a nanosecond. Sure. Miss Abramson says, just so the record is clear, he is reading from pages of transcript. I just glanced over the notebook and saw the format of transcript pages, and my concern is when he turns, the jury can see that that is a transcript page. Court says, okay, well, as far as I said, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me. Maybe it matters to the defendants, Judge. Ms. Abramson says, it's in his notebook. It is a transcript. The court says, it doesn't matter to me if he is reading from a transcript or not. There is nothing in the way he is asking the questions that indicates he is reading from a transcript. He is just reading from some piece of paper in front of him. Ms. Abramson says, I just don't want the jury to see it. The court says Mr. Khan is instructed not to permit the jury to be able to see that in any way what type of page or writing is on that page. Okay, says Mr. Khan. Okay. Now we're back. Court says, okay, let's resume. Mr. Khan says, did you tell Craig Cignarelli that you walked inside the home from the outside, that you went to the door on the left, which was slightly open, and Lyle Menendez put his shoulder against the door on the right? Objection, compound, overruled. No. Did you tell Craig Cignarelli that you then looked in and saw your parents sitting on the couch? No. Did you tell Craig Cignarelli that Lyle Menendez swung open the door and shot your father and looked at you and said, shoot, Mom? No. Did you tell Craig Cignarelli that you shot your mother as she was standing up yelling? No. So all of these are lies that Craig Cignarelli testified to. And does it not seem like they have this somewhere on record, you know, that Cignarelli said these things and he's just going down a list? Did you say this to Cignarelli? Did you say that? And it's putting the question in front of the jury itself, is putting that inference in their minds. Tell us, Mr. Menendez, what did you tell Craig Cignarelli when you admitted to him that you and your brother had shot and killed your parents? I told him what I had told the police I did that night, and I told him the room in which my parents died, and I told him that the police in the newspapers were saying that my parents were shot from behind as they were sitting on the couch, that the people that had killed them had come through the French doors behind the sofa, and that that's not what I thought happened. That I thought that the papers, I also told him that the papers said that it was a mafia killing and that I didn't believe that that's what happened. I believed that it was someone who was friends with my parents or someone that knew my parents and that they came through the side door, not the back doors. And I told him that it looked as though my mother was shot after she was dead because of what my brother had said about the fact that she was not moving when he had shot her. And I told him that, and that I believed that it was someone my parents knew and that it was me. Okay. What I'm asking you, Mr. Menendez, is not what you told him about how you may have happened, about how it may have happened. My question is, what did you tell Craig Cignarelli concerning the fact that you and your brother had shot your parents? I told him that I was the one who was responsible and I got a clear look from him, a strange look, and he said, "No, that's impossible to believe. You're not the type of person who would have done that, a response like that." And I looked at him and said, "You're right. I didn't do it." And that's what I told Craig. So you're saying you never said that your brother was involved? I said that Lyle and I was the one. We were. Mr. Menendez, what I'm asking you is, what did you tell Craig Cignarelli concerning the fact that you and your brother had shot and killed your parents? That we were the ones who had done it? Are you saying that that is all you told him? My brother and I shot our parents, period. You told him nothing more about the incident? Well, I told him that I thought before that I told him that I thought they came in through the side door and all the things that I just said. But once I said that we were the ones that had done it, and his reaction was, no, that's impossible to believe. The type of person that could do this is not you. And that's not what I wanted to hear from him. And at that point, I didn't go any further. Before you told him that you and your brother had shot and killed your parents, you were speaking as if, in speculative terms, you think someone came in through the side door. Is that correct? It was more than speculative. I told him what I believed had happened. But you were stating it as if it was a belief without personal involvement. Is that correct? Right. Now, once you got to the point where you admitted to Craig Cignarelli that you and your brother had shot and killed your parents, are you saying, sorry, are you saying that you told him nothing more than my brother and I killed my parents and let it go? I wasn't going to let it go. I wanted to hear from him that I wasn't a bad person and to go in that direction. I was just in pain and I needed to tell someone. It was overwhelming. But once I got the negative reaction that I did from him, I didn't want to tell him anything further. I didn't want him to believe it. And I said, no, you were right. I'm not the person who did it. Why did you want to hear from him that you are not a bad person? Because I felt like the worst person on earth, and I had this need to tell somebody that I had done this, and I couldn't keep it inside any longer. Did you have a need to tell Detective Edmonds? No. So you told Craig Cignarelli that you and your brother were responsible, and then he told you that you're not the type of person that could do that. Right. And are you saying just because of that one response that you dropped this entirely? No, that's not what I'm saying. Well, what did you say at that point? It was his facial expressions, his tone, and the words that he used, not just that, that made me feel that if I told him more and I went on further, that he would not even want to talk to me anymore, not even want to be around me and that type of thing. And so I said, wasn't the person who had, I said that I wasn't the person who had done it. Now, among the other things that you told Craig Cignarelli was you had a conversation with him about investing. Is that correct? Objection, argumentative as phrased, overruled. I told him that it was one of the career paths that I had decided what to do. Did you tell him that you were thinking of investing some money for a return of between 30 to 40 million dollars? Objection, vague as to time, sustained. Did you ever have a conversation with Craig Cignarelli in which you made a statement to him about making an investment with a return of between 30 to 40 million dollars? I think what I said is that my uncle Brian told me that if I gave him a lump sum of what I received from the estate, that in 5 years that would be what the return would be, somewhere between 15 30 million. If I went into real estate, it would become like my uncle Brian's practice, so to speak, and that's what I told Craig. Why were you telling Craig Cignarelli at that point in time that there was a potential of you getting a return of between 30 and 40 million dollars? Vague as to time, what point in time, says Mr. Levin. The court says, let's see if you can pin it down as to this conversation took place. Yes. Can you tell us when it was that you had this conversation with him about making 30 to 40 million dollars? November 29th. It was the day after, 2 days after I had gotten back from the Thanksgiving vacation in New Jersey with our relatives. And on November 29th, were you still having some reservations about your parents' money and spending your parents' money? Reservations never went away. I felt guilty for getting it. I wasn't sure what to do about it in terms of it was money my father would want me to grow and expand and to further generations of his grandsons and sons and so on, and I didn't know what to do with it, and that's why I talked with so many people about what I should do with it. So did those reservations about your family's money, your parents' money, impair you in any way that your ability to start thinking about making 30 to 40 million? No. So was that was something that you were considering doing at the time, making that investment so that you would make between 30 to 40 million dollars. Is that correct? I don't know. It's what my uncle Brian thought was the best thing to do. He he was what I considered probably the wisest relative in terms of financially, he was the wealthiest, and that's what he said was the best thing to do. I was kind of believing that it was. And you weren't able to make that kind of investment when you were getting a $180 a month allowance, were you? No. Now, you spoke to Detective Zoeller on September the 17th, is that correct? Yes. Did you have a need to reveal to Detective Zoeller the fact that you had killed your parents? No. If I told Detective Zoeller, I'd put my brother and I in jail for the rest of my life, and that's not what I wanted to do. So you had no intention whatsoever to tip the police off, did you? No, no. Now, do you remember telling Detective Zoeller that you had a pair of jeans and there was a hole in the pair of jeans and it was almost like a bullet hole? I believe so, something along those lines. And is that because you were toying with Detective Zoeller? No, no. And tell us, Mr. Menendez, why was it that you, when Detective Zoeller interviewed you on September 17th of 1989 in New Jersey, you started to tell or you told Detective Zoeller something about a pair of jeans with a bullet hole in them? Right. I'm not sure if I said a few or not, or what precisely I said. I don't know why I brought it up. It seemed strange to me when I heard it in court several years later. I don't know what I was thinking. Is it true, Mr. Menendez, that you were just toying with him? I don't know what you mean by that. How am I toying with a Beverly Hills detective? You mean to throw suspicion on me? I'm asking you, Mr. Menendez, why did you do this? I don't believe it's how you're characterizing it. That's not what I was doing, toying. Then why, Mr. Menendez, did you tell Detective Zoeller that you had a pair of jeans with a bullet hole in them? Objection asked and answered. Overruled. I don't know. Do you remember telling Detective Zoeller when he asked you where those jeans were, you said, I don't know, I'm wondering if they could possibly have been in the room? Right. Can you tell us why you told Detective Zoeller on September 17th that you had a suspicion that the pair of jeans might have possibly been in the room? I don't know why I was saying those things. And you knew that bullets weren't used in that shooting, didn't you? What? And you knew that bullets weren't used in that shooting, didn't you? Objection vague as to what bullets mean. Overruled. The witness says, obviously there were bullets used in the shooting. Mr. Khan says, oh, so you think that bullets were used in the shooting. Is that correct, Mr. Menendez? Objection, argumentative. Court says, rephrase the question. Mr. Khan says, is it your belief today, Mr. Menendez, as you sit there, that bullets were used in that shooting? That's what I testified to. What kind of bullets were used in the shooting? Buckshot pellets. Was it your belief that at the time of the shooting those jeans were inside the room? I didn't know. I didn't have the photographs of the room. I don't know where the jeans were. I don't know why I said it. When you spoke to Detective Zoeller on, I am asking you why you said it. When you spoke to Detective Zoeller on September the 17th, 1989, was it your belief at the time that those jeans might possibly have been in the room at the time of the shooting? I guess so. You're guessing, or it was your belief. I don't remember what my belief was about the jeans. I said that I believed they were in the room, and so I probably felt that. I didn't know how else bullet holes could get into my jeans, and I think that may have been my curiosity why a pair of my jeans had a bullet hole in them, and that may have been why I brought it up. And you were convinced. Were you convinced in your mind that the shotgun shells might have created a bullet hole in the jeans? I don't know. I don't remember why I said it. I mean, I can't answer why I said the things that I did. I about that. Now, do you remember telling Detective Zoeller on September the 17th of 89 that your parents had a habit of falling asleep in front of the television downstairs? I guess I said that and things like that, but I think I said that they would generally not do that, that they would go upstairs and fall asleep in the bedroom. Are you saying that you did not tell Detective Zoeller that they did have a habit of falling asleep in front of the television downstairs? I don't remember the precise words I used or even a lot of the phrases I used. If you could show me, I'll tell you exactly what I said. Well, do you remember being asked this question and giving the following answer? Mr. Levin says, page and line counsel, page 10, lines 9 through 16. Do you have a habit? Question, do you have a habit of falling asleep? Let me rephrase that. Do they have a habit of falling asleep in front of the television downstairs, sorry. Skipped a word. Um, Answer, no, no. Well, my mom would. My dad would be up. Actually, they would. Well, they'd fall asleep, but only for like maybe an hour. Usually my dad would be up watching a movie and my mom would fall asleep in his lap, or my mom would be up watching a movie and my dad would fall asleep in the chair. But then as soon as the movie was over, I mean, they wouldn't like fall asleep and wake up at like 2 in the morning. Do you remember that? Right. At the end, I was talking about upstairs in the bedroom where my father had a chair. He would fall asleep there watching a movie and my mom would be in bed. That's what I said. Well, Detective Zoller was asking you to was take hold on. Detective Zoller was talking to you about the television downstairs. Is that correct? Objection, argumentative, overruled. Right, says Eric. And I was first talking about the downstairs TV when I was talking about the couch. Mr. Khan says, and while you were talking about the couch downstairs, you said that they would have a habit of falling asleep in front of the television downstairs. Is that correct? Yes, I did. And is that true, Mr. Menendez, that your parents did in fact have a habit of falling asleep in front of the television downstairs? I guess. I'm not really sure. Normally, they would go upstairs and the TV would be on all night and they would fall asleep in bed, or my dad would be in his chair. I guess so. Are you saying? I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, I guess they could be watching a movie and my mom would fall asleep, or I said just the opposite that my dad would fall asleep and my mom would be up. I'm not really certain. And that's what I'm trying to say to you, Detective Zoller. Are you having more difficulty answering the question today than you had on the 17th of September? Objection argumentative that he's having any difficulty answering it, Your Honor. Overruled. I am having much more difficulty. It's been 6.5 years and I don't remember them. I can't picture them falling asleep on the couch. I don't have an image of that. At the time I said no, yes, sometimes I was saying all sorts of things and I don't know better or and I would know better than I would know now. He would know better then than he would know now. Mr. Menendez, are you having more difficulty answering the question because you don't want this jury to conclude that your parents did have a habit of falling asleep in front of the television? Whether my parents had a habit of falling asleep in front of the television, as to whether that makes any difference, they weren't asleep on August 20th in front of the television. So I am not giving the testimony because of that reason. And that's your testimony that your father was standing at the time you entered the room. Is that correct? He was. Now, did you also tell Detective Zoller on that date that where you had found your father upon your return home on the evening of the shooting was where he was when you had left that day? I don't remember. Well, do you remember being asked the following questions and giving the following answers? Court says page and line. Mr. Khan says, yes, this is once again page 10 and going from line 24 to line 11, line 2. Page 11, line 2. Sorry. So you remember being asked, Ms. Abramson says, just a minute. Mr. Levin says, no objection. Mr. Khan says, do you remember being asked? Question, now, would they normally sit on that couch? Answer, where we found them, at least where we found my dad. Question, that would be consistent with an unintelligible word, they normally sit. Answer, yeah. That's where he was when we left that day. That's where he was watching TV that day, and my mom was usually right next to him. She was on the couch when unintelligible. Do you remember giving that answer? No, but I gave answers similar to that. Can you tell us what you meant when you said that your father was where he was when you had left that day? I was talking about when we left. I don't know what I said before that. It might be clearer. When we left to go to the movies at 8 o'clock, I was telling Detective Zoller that they were in the den watching TV when we left for the movies. At least my dad was where he was. And you're saying that you found your father sitting in the same position where he was when you left to go to the movies that day. Is that correct? Right. I think that's what I was telling Detective Zoller. And in fact, is that true, Mr. Menendez, that when you left the house that day, your father was sitting in that seat and you came back and you shot him while he was in that seat? No. Now, do you remember telling Detective Zoeller on September the 17th that your parents had been locking the door in their bedroom? Right. And is that true that sometime prior to your shooting your parents to death, they had begun locking the door to their bedroom? I think what I was telling him was that there was a general tension and that everyone was locking their doors, that I was locking my door and my parents were locking theirs. I didn't actually physically know that they locked theirs. I never tried and it was locked, but they closed them and that's what I was saying. Why did you believe? Well, what was your reason for believing that your parents had been locking their doors in their bedroom? Only that I was, and that I believed they probably were. Why did you believe that simply because you were locking your door to your bedroom that your parents were also locking the door to theirs? Just because it was very tense several days, and there was a lot of pressure and intensity and fear, and that's what I did. And I attributed it to my parents too. Is it true, Mr. Menendez, that your parents were locking their doors to their bedroom because they were fearful of you before they were killed? Objection calls for speculation. The court says, are you asking his opinion when he made the statement in September? Yes, yes. Overruled. The witness says no. You didn't tell Detective Zoeller that you were locking your doors lately, is that correct? I don't know. I thought I did. Would you like to see the transcript? If you're telling me that I didn't, then I trust you. I wouldn't. So the only bedroom door being locked, at least according to at the time that you spoke to Detective Zoeller back in September of 1989, was your parents' bedroom. Is that correct? I guess so. Now, did you tell Detective Zoeller on September the 17th that after you returned to the home and found your parents, you had walked behind the sofa? I don't know. Directing counsel's attention to page 13, lines 22. Court says, let's take a short break here. I think one of our jurors needs a little break. We'll resume at 20 minutes after the hour. A recess was taken. Then everyone is back, says the court. We will resume with the cross examination. Thank you, says Mr. Khan. Mr. Menendez, do you remember telling Detective Zoeller on September 17th of 1989 that after you arrived home, the evening which your parents were killed, you walked behind the sofa? After I got back home when the 911 call was being made? Yes. Right. I said that to Detective Zoeller. Is it true that you walked behind the sofa that time? I no longer remember doing or not doing it. If I said it, then I did it. Can you think of any reason that you would have to walk behind the sofa? Only that it was then that I was really looking at my mother and my father, and I was looking for weapons as well, and I was walking around the room. And you looked behind the sofa to see if there were weapons on the floor? I don't remember going behind the sofa, so I can't tell you. When you walked behind the sofa, did you see the big hole in the back of your father's head? Objection assumes facts, not in evidence. Overruled. Or that it was visible, says Ms. Abramson. Overruled. Eric says, there was just a lot of blood. There wasn't a hole visible. Mr. Khan says, there wasn't a hole visible? There was just a lot of blood. Now, when you talked to Detective Zoeller on September the 17th, did you question Detective Zoeller as to whether he thought that the killings could have been committed by someone that your parents knew? I believe I said something along those lines. Can you tell us why you asked that question of Detective Zoeller? I can't tell you. Is that because you were probing for information as to how much the police knew at that point? No. Detective Zoeller was not giving me very much information, and I didn't think he would. It was quite clear that he suspected that I was the one that had done it. I don't know why I said that. I don't know why I said a lot of the things that I did in there. You say it was quite clear that he suspected you as the person who had done it. It was becoming obvious. Why was it? And in what way was it becoming obvious to you that Detective Zoller suspected you as the person who had done it? In how much he talked to us. We were trying not to talk to him and we were trying to avoid being interviewed. I didn't want to have to sit down with Detective Zoller. And how the main thing was focused on was what my brother and I did that night and what our alibi was. And he asked us details about that. And I mean, unless we had killed our parents, what I did that night, except for the time maybe when I left the house and came back, wouldn't have been important unless he suspected us. Okay. Is that the reason why you questioned him about whether he suspected the killing was committed by someone that they knew? I think that I said that they were killed by someone that they knew, didn't I? You said that they were killed by someone that they knew. I think that's the same thing I told to Craig, that I believed that they were killed by someone that they knew. I'm not sure the phrasing of the words. Well, would you like to see the transcript? Do you think that would help? Yeah, I would. That would help a lot. Sorry. Just gotta adjust because the dog like dive bombs me and then hits the mic stand. Okay. So yeah, I would. That would help a lot. Well, let me show you page 19 of the transcript, directing your attention to lines 3 and 4. Oh, you're right. Right. I asked him, do you think it could have been someone that they knew killed him? Right. So you weren't telling Detective Zoller at that point in time that it was someone that they knew. You were asking him if it was someone that they knew. Is that correct? Okay. Yes, you're right. Can you tell us why you asked that question? I can't. No answer? I don't know. Is it because you were toying with him? Oh my God. These are very, very severely abused boys. They are not masterminds of how to toy with the cops and try to get away with a crime. No, that's not what's happening here. You look foolish with this line of questioning, Mr. Khan. I wasn't toying with Detective Zoller, says Eric. I liked Detective Zoller. He always treated me very kindly and nicely. I was in no mood to toy with him. It wasn't a joke, and I don't know what I said or why I said those things. Well, prior to asking if he thought it could have been someone that they knew, you said to him, I've been asking about it a lot, and the gate was open. The alarm was off. The door was unlocked. You think it could have been someone they knew? Right. I don't know why I was saying those things. I shouldn't have. I was just throwing more suspicion on me. I don't know why I said it. I said several times in there that I couldn't stop thinking about it every day. I can't give you an answer. Do you remember telling Detective Zoller that it appeared to you that there was no struggle during the shooting? Right. Can you tell us why you said that to Detective Zoller? I don't know why. Did you tell Detective Zoller on that date that you normally didn't come home until after your parents were asleep? I don't remember saying that. If I could see it. Well, do you remember being asked the question? Mr. Levin says, page counsel. Mr. Khan says, yes, page 19, line 27. Levin says, there is no line 27. Mr. Khan says, there is a line after 26 to page 20, lines 1 and 2. No objection. Do you remember being asked the question? Okay. Question. Okay. They usually did not turn the alarm on until they went to sleep. Answer. Oh, I don't know. I don't know really because I didn't come home usually until after they were asleep. Right. That's what I said. Is that true that normally you didn't arrive home until after your parents were asleep? The whole summer, I was playing tennis and I was with them every day during the summer. There was no schedule where I had to be home before they went to sleep. I know that on the two nights before that my mother had been up in her bedroom and she had come downstairs to unlock the door, so it was true. So what time did you normally come home? I didn't have a set schedule. Sometimes I came home at 10. Sometimes I didn't get out. Sometimes I came home after midnight. I was pretty much training in tennis at the time, so normally it was early. Normally, it was early, did you say? Normally, it was early because I had to wake up early to play tennis. Although you went on September 17th, 1989, and you told Detective Zoeller that usually you didn't come home until after they were asleep, not early. Is that correct? Right. In the summer, it was very different than when I was in school, but still, I was training. When I came home on the weekend, I would come home probably after midnight. You had a great deal of freedom to come and go as you pleased. Is that correct, Mr. Menendez? I would come and go. And do you remember telling Detective Zoeller on September 17th that my mom was really nervous lately? Right. Was that true? Yeah, that was true. It was either to Dr. Oziel or to Detective Zoeller. I'm confusing which now. I talked about the fact that she put a new alarm system on the house and that my dad had talked about getting bulletproof windows in his car. That for many months there had been a nervous my parents seemed nervous about something, but that lately she had been even more nervous. Did it appear that she was nervous about your behavior lately? I wouldn't have said that to Detective Zoeller. At least I was trying to avoid that area in terms of what was happening in the house that weekend. So I wouldn't have wanted to portray that. But I did say it but I did say it to Detective Zoeller. I don't know why I kept saying things. I don't know if they were slips or what I was doing. I don't know why. It was probably just nervous chatting because he didn't know what else to say and these were things that he thought he should be saying, but really it was just giving him away. My question to you is, do you know what your mother was nervous about lately? No, I never found out. Do you know if that had anything to do with why she was locking her bedroom door at night? She was locking her bedroom door and turning on the alarm. I don't know why. And she didn't want you to have a key and get in the door without her knowing it? Not having a key had been for 3 years since we moved to California. That was nothing new. That hadn't changed. Did you tell Detective Zoller on September 17th that I don't want to go to school this year? I talked about school. I think I told him that I had September 17th was just after I had talked to the dean at Princeton University and found out that I would not be able to go to Princeton, which is what I think I said, and that as a result I was not going to go to school. I was probably going to go on to play tennis, which is something your father was might have put an end to if he had lived. Is that correct, Mr. Menendez? Right. My father had not decided whether or not he wanted me to try out for the UCLA team. And then do you remember Detective Zoller asking you on September 17th if you have had any recent problems with your parents at all? Right. I think I told him that we had had some arguments and that I was hoping I would get away from my father by going to school. Well, when he asked you that question, you told him that you spent the whole summer playing tennis together. Is that correct? Right. I told him about the tennis tour. Did you say that to him that, quote, we were usually pretty close right up until the day they died? Could we have the page, says Mr. Levin. Mr. Khan says page 30, line 18. Mr. Levin says just a moment. Mr. Khan says, do you remember telling Detective Zoller that you were pretty close right up until the day you died? Or they died, sorry. I don't recall saying that, but if it's there, then I said it. Was it true? Objection misstates the transcript and his testimony is out of context. The court says, why don't you just read the whole thing? Mr. Khan says, yes. Do you remember this? Mr. Khan says, counsel, what line do you propose to read? Mr. Khan says, I'll read the whole page. I will read from line 6 to 24. No objection, says Mr. Levin. Do you remember this conversation? Quote or question, did you have any recent, it says reason, did you have any recent problems with your parents at all? Answer, well, actually, we spent the whole summer together playing tennis. Question, that's unusual? You don't generally spend the summers together playing tennis. Answer, no, I do. Question, had not been? Answer, I do. We do it every summer usually. Question, yeah. Answer, except for last summer when I fractured my ankle, so I was pretty much idle, but we were basically I spent every second of the day with him. Question, yeah. Answer, and so we're usually pretty close, right? We were usually pretty close right up until the day that they died, but no big thing, no real big. My dad in last May or April thought that I wasn't opening up in tennis, and so, Question, sounds like he was being a typical father. Answer, yeah, exactly. And we wanted to go to college really bad. We were getting away from him, and unintelligible was trying to say stay away and doing other things. But do you remember that? Right. Can you tell us, Mr. Menendez, why you agreed that your father sounds like a typical father? Just, I was taking it in the sense that fathers can sometimes be demanding or want their way, and I was agreeing. Well, you weren't talking about your father being demanding, though, were you? I think that he said it sounds like a typical father when I talked about the fact that in May I wasn't opening up enough to my dad, and my dad wanted me to open up, and he said, sounds like a typical father. You also said that you were pretty close right up until the day that they died. Isn't that correct? Right, I was. And is that true, Mr. Menendez? You were very close to your father up until the day he died? It depends how you characterize close, but I spent virtually every day with him that summer. And now, Mr. Menendez, Brian Eslamenia was a friend of yours, is that correct? He was. And he was a friend of yours before you were arrested, correct? Yes. When did you first meet Brian? Actually met him before I knew who he was in my history class when I was in my senior year at school, in high school. And then I first was introduced to him by his girlfriend, who I was friends with at a movie in Westwood. How much did you associate with him prior to the time that you were arrested for killing your parents? Prior to my parents' death, I wasn't really that close with him. Afterwards, the circumstances where we lived, we became closer and we became close friends, so to speak. Did he begin visiting you in jail? After I was arrested, he came down to jail 4 or 5 times to visit me. And when did he begin visiting you? Sorry. Almost immediately. He came down with my grandmother, I think, for the first week that I was in jail, maybe the second week. Over what period of time did he visit you? He visited me several times that first year and then one time in 91. But other than that, he only visited like 4 or 5 times. He didn't live in the area, so it was not easy for him. And to your knowledge, Brian Eslamenia was not a friend of your brother's prior to the time of your arrest. Is that correct? Right. I am not sure that they had ever met. And at some point in time, Mr. Eslamenia offered to help you, didn't he? Well, as soon as I was arrested, my first attorney that I had for about 2 weeks before Leslie, Ms. Abramson, and he had told that attorney that I was with him that night, the night of the killings, on a boat with him, and therefore I could not be responsible. He was trying to help me like that immediately. And I told the attorney, obviously, it wasn't so. And then afterwards, when he came down, he was talking about if I needed character witness to talk about different parts of my personality or things that he had seen that he could be a help pretty much in any way. He said he wanted to help us in any way. He didn't really limit it. He was willing to lie, give him an alibi. When Mr. Islamania indicated to you that he was willing to help you in any way, you understood that to mean that he would also commit perjury for you. Is that correct? Objection, argumentative as phrased. Overruled. Yeah, I got that feeling that since he was willing to tell my attorney without my even asking him to, that I was with him the night my parents died, that he would probably not have a problem lying to help me. And when was it that you had that conversation with him in which you made that conclusion that this is a person who would commit perjury for you? Almost immediately. He was saying it when he would come down to visit. Anything I need, anything he can help me with. Do I want to find out who did this? He thought that I was not responsible and that I was falsely arrested. And so he was, willing to help in any way to find out who really killed my parents and if he could check into it. And he did not know that I was responsible. So I just, I kind of brushed it off in terms of how we could help or how he could help in uh as maybe in a character witness way. And you assisted him in making that conclusion, that in drawing that conclusion that you were not responsible for the killing of your parents. Is that correct? Right. I certainly told him that I was not responsible. And after he indicated to you that he was willing to help you in any way, is that when the meeting with your brother took place? What meeting? Mr. Levin says objection assumes facts, not an evidence, and vague as to time. The court says sustained as to the form of the question, the answer is stricken. Mr. Khan says, was it your understanding that at some point he met your brother? He was visiting my brother when he would come down. My brother and I were housed in different locations, and he would come down with my grandmother or one of my aunts and visit me, and then visit Lyle and one of my aunts because my grandmother had problems driving, and so he would take her to see both of us or whatever relatives were in town on the few occasions that he came down. I didn't see him together though with Lyle. What was he talking about? I forgot. I've already forgot. Oh, Brian as Laminia. Sorry. Um, Next question. Did you ask him at any time, why are you visiting my brother? Well, I knew why he was visiting my brother. The 4 times he came down, he was taking my grandmother to visit my brother and got to know my brother and liked my brother and began with Lyle during the visits. You're saying that he used to transport your grandmother? Is that correct? Right. It didn't require him to go into the jail and meet with your brother, did it? He could have waited downstairs. And was it your understanding that the only reason why he was meeting with your brother was because of the transportation situation? There was no other reason other than the fact that he was there, and yes. Well, after he began to offer any assistance that he could give you, did you then speak to him about possible assistance that he could give you? You're talking the first 2 months that I was arrested, the first 3 months that I was in jail, and I wasn't thinking about my case in any way at that point. So are you saying, Mr. Menendez, that at no time did you ever have any conversations whatsoever with Mr. Aslamania regarding any assistance that he could give you? Other than what I've told you, no. Just as a character witness, is that correct? Right. And you never recommended in any way that he talk to your brother, is that correct? About what? The question is, did you ever recommend in any way that he talk to your brother? No. How did you become aware at some point in time that your brother had written a letter to Brian as Lamania? About a year and a half later, I knew that Lyle was very desperate to avoid going to this trial in which we talked about sexual things concerning my father, and I knew that he was trying hard to avoid that, and he was trying to dissuade me from talking about it in open court in front of the world, and I knew that he had talked to Brian. I didn't. Mr. Khan says, I would object at this point. It's non responsive. And the court says, objection sustained. The answer is stricken. It's non responsive. Mr. Khan says, once again, Mr. Menendez, the question that I asked you is that at some point, did you become aware that your brother had written a letter to Brian as Lamania? I know that he had talked to Brian. I don't know if it was a letter or in a visit, but I know at some point that he had asked Brian to lie for him in some way. So you're saying that you never at any time became aware of a letter. For all you know, he just may have had conversations with Brian? It became very clear that there was a letter once the letter was turned over in discovery, but before that, I don't remember whether it was a letter or whether he had talked to him personally. It didn't matter much to me. And when you say turned over in discovery, you mean that the prosecution turned this letter over to your attorneys. Is that correct? Right. Did you become aware that in that letter your brother writes of Brian as Lamania falsely testifying on behalf of himself and you? I became aware of that. Now, is it your testimony, Mr. Menendez, that up until the time you learned of this letter by the prosecution turning it over to your attorneys, you had no knowledge of any plan for him to testify falsely? I knew that Lyle had gone to him. I definitely knew that. Whether he had asked him in a letter or at a visit, I didn't know. At least I don't remember knowing, but I knew that he had gone to Brian and that Brian was somehow in some way going to help in his idea of how to avoid talking about the molestation in the trial. I didn't know those specifics thereon. It was a struggle time between Lyle and I whether or not we should or would talk about the things at the trial. Well, how did you learn that your brother had gone to Brian? He told me. Lyle told you? Yes. And he told you that he had been having conversations with Brian Eslamania about providing false testimony in front of a jury. Right. I don't know that it was that. What it was. I know that he said he had talked to Brian, that somehow Brian was going to help in his way, that I should not go and take the stand and say that there was anything going on with my father, and that I should omit all of that for Dad's sake and for the pride of the family, and so on, and that he would find another way that could avoid talking about the molestation, and somehow Brian was going to help him in that way. That's sweet. He thought that he could help keep their family secret, but unfortunately, um, they're also like dumb teenagers. So the idea of I'm gonna help you, get out of jail when in reality you're like committing a crime. You might not that doesn't necessarily click in a teenager's brain. So that might be why he helped. And you knew that involved false testimony. Is that correct? I assume that it did, or he told me, one of the two. How did you respond when your brother told you of this plan to present false testimony before a jury? I told him that the false testimony in front of a jury was not what I was focused on the fact that Lyle was not dealing with the fact that he had been molested and that he was going to have to talk about these things and that these things were going on and that I wanted him to come to terms with that. And I had many conversations with different people, Father Ken, asking him to help Lyle because Lyle was not coming to terms with it and was doing these other things. Well, this thing, and I think Jamie, and to try to get out of talking about molestation. And I was having a lot of frustration with Lyle at the time, and we weren't able to. Mr. Khan says, I would object as non-responsive. Mr. Levin says, objection, Your Honor. It's very relevant. He asked him the question. Court says, all right, well, he's answered it. Let's go on to the next question. It's absolutely relative, and it's just not what the prosecution wants to hear. That he was frustrated with Lyle because Lyle was only doing these things to stop the molestation talk from coming out at trial. He didn't want to testify about it, and he was struggling with coming to terms with it, according to Erik. He didn't even want to, like, maybe admit to it to himself. Mr. Khan says, oh, wait, I read that. We're moving on. Mr. Khan says, Mr. Menendez, my question to you is not were you focused on providing testimony about the molestation. My question to you is how did you respond to your brother intending to present perjured testimony in front of a jury? I told him that it was stupid, that it didn't make any sense to me. There was only one way in which my parents died, and that's how it happened, and anything else wasn't going to make sense. That I didn't care about the details of what he was thinking or even if he had things that were in detail, just that he was doing this to get out of having to talk about these things with dad. And so I was more focused on that, saying, this is crazy. You've got to talk about these things. There's no other way to go about it. When did you have this conversation with your brother about presenting perjured testimony in front of a jury? Objection, it misstates his testimony. Rephrase the question, says the court. When did you have this conversation with your brother concerning the proposed testimony of Brian Eslamania? I didn't talk about Brian testifying. I talked about the fact that these ideas that he has are make no sense and that it's just a way for him to stall and not have to talk about it. And I would either do it in a letter to Lyle because we weren't able to see each other, or one of the times when we would go to court and we were able to talk. What idea makes no sense? The idea that he could actually go to a trial and say that he killed our parents and take out the only important issue, the only reason that it all happened, which was the sex between dad and I. It just was stupid. It didn't make any sense to me. Are you saying that you never discussed the aspect of the plan about presenting false testimony? I don't know what you mean by that. Was it your understanding that part of the plan was that Brian Eslamania would be presenting false testimony? What do you mean by plan? What was in Lyle's head? What he was talking about or thinking about? My question, he was thinking about that, and that's what he was talking to Brian about, or had talked to Brian, or sent him a letter, and that's how Lyle was going to avoid those talking about those issues in court. I didn't know how, and I didn't care how. It was stupid to me, and I mean, my attorneys knew what happened, my relatives knew what happened. I mean, how we were not going to go forward with that in court didn't make any sense to me. Are you saying at some point you became aware of the fact that your brother, Lyle Menendez, wanted Brian Eslamania to present false testimony in court, or you never became aware of that fact? Yes, I am aware of that. That's what I'm asking you. How did you respond to that fact when you became aware of it? Objection, Vegas to time. Overruled. The witness says, I think I just told you. Mr. Khan says, you've told us about your feelings about not talking about the molestation. Is that correct? And that's what I was talking about back and forth with Lyle, how he needed to talk to the people that were helping at the time, talk to Father Ken, a psychiatrist, and deal with this issue. And he was saying that he didn't want to talk about that and that we carried dad's pride. And whenever I would get into that, it would be an argument with him about whether or not, he said that he would rather die or escape than have to talk about their secrets. And you did not discuss with him anything concerning presenting false testimony. Is that correct? In that context, yes, he was saying, listen, we don't have to go with this. We don't have to say that dad molested us. We can go with something else similar or similar to what you said about how. And how did you respond? Mr. Levin says, objection. He didn't complete his answer. The court says, finish your answer. Erik says, about maybe saying there were guns in the room or something that would avoid having to talk about the molestation. And somehow Brian was going to help him with that. The ideas I didn't care about. Mr. Khan says, you didn't care whether there was going to be false testimony or not? I knew that it was going to be false testimony. That I knew. Did you ever tell your brother it's wrong to present false testimony? I may have. I don't know. That wasn't the focus of what I was trying to do. The focus was not that Lyle was going to try to have Brian help him in some way in court. It was the fact that he was going to do that to avoid talking about these issues, which he needed to come to terms with. And that's what I was focused on and was frustrated that he would not. Are you saying that you had no problem with your brother presenting false testimony as long as he included issues of molestation? No, that's not what I'm saying. Yes, I had a problem with him presenting false testimony. Obviously, he was not going to present false testimony. I'm his brother. I'm in court with him. I'm going to know about it. I'm not going to let it happen. I wasn't worried that Lyle was going to present false testimony. It wasn't going to happen. Did you tell your brother I'm not going to let you present false testimony? I'm sure that I did. I told him that. You don't remember doing that? I told him there was only one way in which this was going to happen, and we were going to say we did it, and we were going to have to talk about the molestation. There's no other way to go to court. There's no other way to handle it. And he was trying to find a way out and not talk about those things. And so that's what I was saying. How did your brother respond when you told him that you would not let him present false testimony in a court of law? He was pleading with me and talking about dad's image and how he didn't want to kill dad twice and he didn't now want to kill his reputation. And I was saying, you just feel responsible for dad's death. And I said, don't be responsible for dad putting you in jail for the rest of your life by now not talking about these secrets. And it went on for several months until he called Brian and told Brian that he was going to testify and tell the truth. It went on for several months. This never came into the first trial, if I recall. It may not have been turned over in discovery or whatever. It might not have been discovered until they went through the discovery process later for the second trial, because it seems like it's for the first trial they're talking about, because they didn't want the molestation to come out. And obviously, if it was the second trial, it would have already been on record. So it has to be the first trial that they're talking about. Soon after they were jailed, that they started talking to Brian. Brian's coming, dropping off grandma, and then he starts saying, I'll help you guys in any way. Um, so isn't it true, Mr. Menendez, that you wanted to kill your father's reputation by presenting stories of molestation? I didn't. I wasn't as concerned with Dad's reputation as Lyle was. My relationship with my father was not as close as my brother was. My love for him was not as strong as my brother's love for him and his name and his image. And Lyle was consumed with that, and I was not going to protect Dad in that way. And by at that point saying going to trial and saying not guilty is the only other way you could do it. It's kind of also re-victimizing Erik. Lyle's decision not to come out about it is like delegitimizing Erik's experience, because if Lyle comes out and talks about his own experiences, it validates Erik's. But by ignoring it and pushing it away, it's almost as if, he's ignoring it himself and the damage that it's done to himself, but he's also kind of ignoring the damage that it's done to Erik, because Erik was so severely brutalized by his father over and over again, whereas Lyle was, but he was younger. And I'm sure the human mind is, able to do some wild things. So it's possible that his brain is just like, you know what? I'm going to put that aside and not deal with it, and nothing's happened since, and I'm good. I'm just going to still love and respect my father and just you know, go with the flow. So it's probably easier for Lyle to say, I don't want to talk about it. This stuff didn't happen, because he's already been pushing it away for so long. Whereas it's fresh and new to Erik still, because it was still happening. So there's a huge difference between the two of them and how they're dealing with it. So I'm glad that he was able to come around and talk about it. So you were a little more willing to put your father's reputation on trial than your brother was? Objection. It's argumentative. Overruled. Mr. Levin says, it also assumes, the witness says, I wouldn't say a little bit more willing. Lyle was adamant about the fact that we could not do that, and we should not do that. And I was saying to Lyle that you're going to let dad now destroy your life simply because you feel responsible for taking his, and you're going to allow him to put you in jail for the rest of your life by protecting him. Mr. Khan says, now, after you became aware of the letter, he just moves along. He doesn't want to talk about that because that was kind of powerful what Erik just said there, and I'm going to repeat it. So Lyle was adamant about the fact that we would not do that and we should not do that. Talk about the molestation. And I was saying to Lyle that you're going to let dad now destroy your life simply because you feel responsible for taking his, and you're going to allow him to put you in jail for the rest of your life by protecting him, by keeping his secrets, his dirty little secrets. You're taking his punishment. Mr. Khan says, now, after you became aware of the letter to Brian as Laminia, did you discuss that letter with your brother? I didn't. I didn't discuss anything more about Brian other than what I'm just telling you now. I didn't discuss anything more about Brian. Sorry. I didn't discuss anything more about Brian. Did you ever have a brief exchange with your brother concerning the letter? Objection. Calls for hearsay, says Mr. Levin. The court says it can be answered yes or no at this point. The witness says, about the letter? No. Mr. Khan says, were you aware from reading the letter that you were apparently being implicated in a plan to present false evidence to a jury? Objection. Assumes facts, not in evidence. The court says, rephrase the question. Well, you were aware from looking at this letter that the proposed testimony called for Mr. Eslamania testifying to an incident which involved both you and your brother. Objection. Assumes facts, not in evidence. Court says overruled. Erik says, well, Lyle was trying to persuade me against going with what happened and going with something that he had. Again, motion to strike, non-responsive, says Mr. Khan. Court says, sustained. The answer stricken. Let's have the question read back or you can re-ask it. Let's have the question read back. What was the question? Let's go back. Why was that so powerfully stricken? You were aware from looking at the letter that the proposed testimony called for him to testify falsely, I guess. And he says, well, Lyle was trying to persuade me against going with what had happened and going with something that he had. I don't know. Again, motion to strike. Sustain. The answer stricken. The record was read as follows. The question was, well, were you aware from looking at this letter that the proposed testimony called for Mr. Eslamania testifying to an incident which involved both you and your brother? Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, there's an objection with respect to assumes facts, not in evidence, and we request to approach if there's any other questions in this area regarding the attorney-client privilege. The court says, you're asking from looking at the document and reading it? Mr. Khan says, yes, Your Honor. Mr. Levin says, there's no evidence. The court says, all right, well, at this point, he's indicated he saw it, that at least, why don't you establish when did he see it? Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, I respectfully disagree. He said he was aware of it through discovery. The court says, well, at some point, maybe he's never seen it. Let's find out. Mr. Khan says, did you read the letter, Mr. Menendez? Right. I read the letter several months ago. Okay. When you read the letter several months ago, after reading that letter, did you become aware of the fact that it called for proposed testimony in which Mr. Eslamania would be testifying to an incident that supposedly involved both you and your brother? Objection. It's argumentative. Overruled. What I'm trying to say is says Erik, I had assumed that from what my brother said, he wanted Brian to help him. I'm in the same trial with Lyle. Brian was going to help him. Brian was going to have to lie because Brian didn't have anything to do with what happened with my parents. And obviously, I was going to be sitting here in court and he was going to have to either testify or help us in some way in my case. And so clearly, that was the situation. I was telling Lyle that that was not going to happen and it didn't. It just, it's not possible. So you assumed that he would be testifying to an incident involving yourself? Objection vague as to time. Why don't you establish the foundation? Mr. Khan says, when did you assume that Brian Eslaminia was going to be testifying to an incident concerning your case? Objection assumes facts, not an evidence. Overruled. Erik says, the thing is, I didn't know if he was going to be testifying or what he was going to be testifying about. Clearly, if he was testifying about anything, he'd be lying and I'd be allowing him to do it. And I told Lyle that that was not going to happen and I wasn't going to let him do it. I became aware of the specifics of what he wanted Brian to say when I read the letter. Mr. Menendez, didn't you just tell us that you made the assumption that Brian was going to be testifying to an incident concerning your case? No, that's not what I meant to say if I said it. Well, let me ask you, did you make an assumption before seeing the letter that Brian Eslaminia was going to be testifying to an incident concerning your case? I don't believe I knew specifically that he was going to testify to a certain incident. I just knew that in some way he was going to help Lyle. I believe I thought that would be testifying in some way about something. You didn't know that that was necessarily going to implicate you, that is, with you being personally involved in the subject matter of his testimony, did you? Objection vague. Overruled. I didn't know one way or the other. Mr. Khan says, okay, but then after you read the letter, the court says, wait, did you finish your answer? No. Why don't you finish? I didn't know one way or the other. If he was testifying, he'd be lying. So obviously at that point, I'd be allowing him to lie, and that's what I told Lyle was not going to happen. A lot more than that, but I became aware of exactly what he wanted Brian to say when I read the letter. And after you read the letter, then you became aware that the proposed testimony called for an incident involving both you and your brother. Is that correct? Objection. It's irrelevant under 352. It's confusing under the time frame problem. Court says, all right, again, let's establish when he read the letter and when he became aware of its contents. Mr. Khan says, is it your testimony that you read the letter a few months ago? Yes, sir. And at that time, did you become aware of the fact that the proposed testimony called for an incident involving both you and your brother? Objection, it's irrelevant. Overruled. Yes, sir. Mr. Khan says, okay, and did you ask Lyle Menendez when he was confident that you would go along in some testimony in which you were personally involved? Objection, argumentative and assumes facts, not in evidence. Overruled. The witness says, Lyle was never confident that I would go along with it. He was trying hard to get me to, not to testify to the things I said I was going to, and to protect Dad. He wasn't confident about it, and he eventually called Brian and told him not to testify, that he was going to go with the truth. And Brian never testified in the first trial. And Lyle was not confident in any way. He was asking Brian to do something, and I saw it as desperation, and I didn't think of it more than that. Did you ask your brother Lyle Menendez why did he assume that you would sit by and let Brian testify to an incident involving not only him but yourself? Well, I'm trying to tell you that we had discussions about the fact that he wanted Brian to testify, and I was telling him it wasn't going to happen, and he was hoping to persuade me to protect Dad's image. So are you saying that you never asked your brother why he assumed that you would go along with this? No. And you're telling us that this letter was sent out to Brian Eslamania without your knowledge? Yes. Brian Eslamania was your friend, not Lyle's. Isn't that correct? Objection. Calls for speculation. Overruled. At what time are you asking? By the time the letter was sent in 91, Lyle had more contact with Brian than I did. I hadn't talked to him in over a year. Are you saying he became better friends with Brian in 91 than he was with you? Objection. Calls for speculation. Overruled. I wouldn't say that someone was. I had some friends that I like very much, and I consider them my friends, and I hadn't spoken to them in a year and a half because I'm in jail. I was in jail at the time. I didn't get very much phone time, and Brian was difficult to reach, and I didn't speak to him for many, many months at the time. So, in that sense, he was closer to Lyle, I guess, but I wouldn't say he was a closer friend to Lyle. And is it also your testimony that in all the times that Mr. Eslamania came to visit you in jail, he never once mentioned a plan or discussion between myself and your brother to provide false testimony? Is that correct? Brian never visited me. Brian visited me once after that letter was sent out, about 8 months after that letter was sent out, after Lyle had already called Brian and told Brian that Lyle was going to testify and that we were going to go with the truth. And so I never saw Brian or talked to him on the phone after that letter was sent out before Lyle called him. Now, the other person that you admitted to whom you admitted the killing of your parents was Dr. Oziel. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Why did you begin to see Dr. Oziel? Objection, Your Honor. We would ask to approach. All right, we'll have a discussion on that subject, on that objection. And why don't we have it over here in the hallway? They're going in the hallway for a little quick sidebar. Ms. Abramson asks, where are we? What's the scope of his examination vis-a-vis Oziel? Mr. Levin says, my understanding is from speaking with Dr. Oziel's attorney, Brad Brunin, as of yesterday, Dr. Oziel has not been served with a subpoena. The court says, well, at this point, the court has instructed that the prosecution not go into anything involving statements allegedly made by the defendant to Oziel, to which the defendant has indicated that in his former testimony or stated in his former testimony did not make those statements until we have a hearing. And I assume that's how Mr. Khan is proceeding. Correct. I'm not going to get into the denials at this time. I'm going to get into other materials. Ms. Amerson says, well, just to make sure with respect to all the other material that all the rulings of the court about inadmissible portions of the other material are going to be observed. The BBC, everything the court ruled before the first trial, that was not admissible, all of those things. Mr. Khan says, of course, I'm going with the rulings of the court, and that's what I'm going to do. Court says, okay. And now we're back in court in front of the jury. When did you start to see Dr. Oziel? Asks Mr. Khan. Miss Abramson says, objection, Your Honor, privileged. Overruled. The witness says, what do you mean? Before or after my parents died, do you mean? When did you meet the man? I met him in October of 1988. No, it was September of 1988. When did you begin to meet with him regularly? Your Honor, there's a continuing objection regarding privilege, says Mr. Levin. The court says, all right, the fact of the meetings are not privileged. Overruled. The witness says, I began meeting him about once a week. Mr. Khan says, from September of 88 up until when? Up until there were times when I wouldn't see him for several weeks because of tennis or other things, or I would just miss an appointment. But up until June, after June, I was going the tennis circuit, so I didn't see him again until I called him on around August 14th to try to have an appointment with him, and then I saw him at the memorial service and at the Bel Air Hotel when he came for several days. He came to visit them for several days after the death. Why were you meeting with Dr. Oziel? Objection calls for privilege. Overruled, says the court. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I'd like to be heard. The court says, let's do it this way. We'll have a little bit of discussion here. We'll let the jury take a break in the jury room while we have that discussion. The jury exits, and now we've got arguments outside the presence of the jury. Ms. Abramson says, I'd like to ask permission to argue this area, Your Honor. Sure, says the court. Ms. Abramson says, if you ask someone why they're seeing a therapist, you're asking for subject matter of the sessions, or at least that's one possible interpretation. If what Mr. Khan is trying to get out is how did you come to be in contact with him? How were you referred? Whose request was it? That's different. I mean, and that seems to be matters that are already before the jury. But we are staunchly defending the privilege with respect to the subject matter of his therapy with Dr. Oziel in 1988 and 1989 until June. There has never been a ruling that any content of that was unprivileged, and it is not. And so we would ask if Mr. Khan is trying to get more mundane matters, that he ask more focused questions than simply, why are you seeing someone? I mean, the usual answer would be because I was having problems with this, that, and the other, or I was suffering from thus and such, and or I needed to talk about this and that. And all of that is subject matter of the therapy, which reveals communications and so is privileged. Mr. Khan asks the court. Mr. Khan says yes. Well, we have statements from the defendant to Dr. Oziel which are admissible, and those statements have been received before the jury. And the defendant has challenged the reliability and accuracy of those statements, and there's no way that the jury can possibly sort out those issues without knowing something about the relationship between the defendant and Dr. Oziel. And the reason for which he was there on that particular day, December the 11th of 1989, and the relationship that preceded it, to put it all into context. I don't think that counsel can exclude any evidence concerning the nature of the relationship or his feelings towards this therapist. Court says, well, did you intend to go into the nature of communications or the content of communications rather that occurred between the defendant and Oziel prior to December 11th? Mr. Khan says, well, I'm not focused on specific conversations, but I think it's necessary to establish that relationship, so it's a tough question to answer. It depends on the extent to which he can explain the relationship and the reason for him being there without getting into the specific conversations. Ms. Abramson says this shouldn't be a tight walk rope that the defendant has to figure out when we're asserting the privilege now as to any questions having to do with why he's in therapy with Dr. Oziel, using language of that. And so it's for the people to come up with questions that are narrowly drawn in enough that they aren't violative of the privilege. We are now asserting the privilege. And the relationship per se, we don't believe is the issue. It's unquestionable that he went to Oziel in October, and he went to Oziel in November, and he went to Oziel in December. Now, what the nature of his relationship was with Oziel before that would tend to reveal what kinds of things they talked about, what kind of help, if any, Oziel gave, what the interaction between Oziel and the family was, and all of that is privileged. And I think the reason it's a tough question to answer is because he doesn't want to tell the court that the answer is yes, he intends to go into privileged material. Mr. Khan says, well, I disagree with counsel that it's the obligation of the prosecution to come up with the narrowly drawn questions. The fact of the matter is that the tape recording from December 11th is, in fact, admissible. It has been received. The privilege has been waived. Now, it is only reasonable that if the privilege has been waived, we can ask questions of a witness concerning that meeting and the significance of that meeting in his mind. Court says, let me suggest that, Ms. Amerson says, first of all, we should not, the court says, you approach it from that perspective and work backward. So he's saying, let me suggest that you approach it from that perspective and work backward and see where it goes rather than from the beginning. And that would be a more appropriate inquiry, starting with December 11th and his reasons for doing certain things and working backward. Ms. Abramson says, well, it's improper for the people to ask questions to which they know there's going to be an objection based on privilege in front of the jury. The court says you can state your objection in some other fashion as to approach, but it seems to me that when the defendant gives certain explanations as to why he did or didn't say certain things or said things in a certain way and didn't disclose certain things and did disclose other things on December 11th, then the people have a right to explore the relationship. The defendant himself has talked about his relationship with Oziel and why he didn't trust him and things of that nature. He said those things himself. When he says those things, then the people have the right to explore that. Ms. Abramson says, fine. The court says, If it goes into confidential communications between him and Oziel, then that's the way it's going to have to be. Ms. Abramson says, well, all of this came out in the last trial also, and that wasn't held at that time. Court says, well, the defendant was never on the witness stand after the tape was played. Abramson says, he said he didn't trust him. Court says, the tape was never played. The defendant was never cross-examined about the tape recording during the first trial. I know, says Miss Abramson. Court says now he has, and he's given certain answers, and the prosecution can confront him. Ms. Abramson says there was testimony concerning lack of trust of Oziel. There was also testimony by Dave Marovich about Erik Menendez making statements to him that he didn't trust Oziel. There was testimony they thought Oziel was out for their money. My goodness, weeks of litigation showing Oziel's character and that he was out for their money. Judalon Smith, the court cuts her off and says, we're now talking about this defendant in this trial making certain statements on direct examination, and now the people have a right to cross-examine him. That's what's occurring. And as I said, it should be approached from the perspective of the December 11th session with Oziel and the defendant's responses to earlier questions and his responses to the questions of the prosecution in cross-examination. I think at this point, as far as whether or not that will lead to disclosures of communication between the defendant and Oziel in other sessions, I have no way of evaluating, but if he was waived by earlier answers, then Ms. Abramson says, we don't believe he's. I understand that's your belief, says the court, but I can't deal with it until I hear specific questions. Ms. Abramson says, I'd like to be able to instruct my client, Your Honor, at this point concerning how he should purport himself vis-a-vis questions about that, if I might. Certainly, you can confer with your client. The witness says, Barry. I don't know. The defendant, Erik, confers with his attorneys. And then the court says, okay, counsel have had a chance to confer with the witness. Let's have the jury out, please. The jury comes out. And the court says, okay, you may resume your cross-examination. Mr. Khan says, thank you. Mr. Menendez, did you meet with Dr. Oziel on December the 11th of 1989? Yes. And did you hear the tape recording that was played in this courtroom entailing a meeting between yourself, Dr. Oziel, and your brother Lyle? Yes. And is that a recording of a meeting that took place on December 11th of 1989? Well, the meeting, we talked about 4 hours, and that was one of the tapes that was made. Did you see more than one tape being made? Yes. Tell me what you saw in that regard. That he would put different tapes over 2 hours. Once he stopped in the middle when for a particular point that my brother was, I saw different tapes. So there's things that are cut out, maybe possibly intentionally, things that Oziel said that he stopped the tape for. Well, how many different tapes did you see? At least two others. Two others on that day? Yes. So tell us what you saw him do in regard to the first tape that you saw. He put the tape in. We had talked for about an hour before then. He put the tape in and he wanted us to bring up experiences in our past that would relate to a tape of a mercy killing or my mother and why my mother no longer wanted to live and that he wanted to relate experiences. Oziel. And at one point, Dr. Oziel was saying that my father was incapable of loving Lyle or I. He did not love us, and that my father was like a machine, and he described my father in unpleasant ways, and my brother was hurt by that and said that my father did love us. My dad was not a machine, and Dr. Oziel was saying that my dad was like a sadist in ways he would dominate people, and my brother was saying that my father did love us and that that was not true. And Dr. Oziel stopped the tape at that point and talked for a few minutes, and then he put in another tape. What did he do with the first tape that he made? He has a desk in his office, and he would put it on the desk. Sorry. And what did he do on with the second tape that you saw? Well, this is, I believe, the last tape. Did you say that there were 3 tapes in total? I remember there being 2 others, one that he had stopped. I believe there was one before that, and this one was, I'm sure, the last one and not the first one. In regard to the first tape, you said that after talking for about an hour, he removed the tape. He placed the tape in the tape recorder. Is that correct? Yes. And then after some discussions, he removed that first tape. Is that correct? Yes. What did he do with that tape? Put it on his desk. And then then what did you see him do with the second tape? He put the second tape as he put in the second tape as the discussion kept going. So he was recording on the second tape. And how long did that tape run? It was cut off in the middle when he started saying that my father was incapable of loving us, and Lyle got into that argument with Dr. Oziel. Okay, so Oziel stops the tape to tell the brothers, your father didn't love you. Oziel's a piece of shit. If you didn't know that already from watching him in the first trial. But yeah, that's what he was doing. And he was trying to make money off of them too and all sorts of things. He's awful. Didn't you just tell us that he cut off the tape he cut off the first tape when Lyle started talking about the fact that his father did love you? No, I didn't mean to say that if I said that. He had put in a tape, and I believe he took out the tape, and an hour and a half after he had started taping, he had stopped the tape. All right, let me start over. He put in a first tape. Yes, sir. After speaking for about an hour. Is that what you're saying? Yes. And then how long did that tape run? Till it ended, and he put in a second tape. So that tape ran until the end. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And then are you saying that he didn't flip it over? He simply took it out? Right. He did not flip it over. And then he put in a second tape. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And the second tape, how long did that tape run? I don't remember how long it was. Probably 20 minutes, maybe 15 before it. He stopped it. And he stopped it at that point that you're saying your brother said something about your father loving you? Yes, that my father did love us and was capable of loving us, and there was an exchange about that. And Dr. Oziel stopped the tape and explained the reasons for him personally knowing my father. And he talked some more, and another tape, a different tape was put in. How long did that tape run for? I believe the tapes were about an hour long. That third tape ran for about an hour? I'm not sure. I just remember him putting in several tapes, and I don't know specifically how long, whether they were 45 minutes, hour tapes, or what. That tape ran somewhere, to the best of your recollection, about 45 minutes to an hour. Yes, sir. And when you say that the first tape ran until the end, was that also, to the best of your recollection, a 45-minute to an hour tape? Yes, I believe so. Now, the tape recording that you heard here in court, which one was it? The first tape, the second tape, or the third tape? I believe it was the last tape, only because it was when I broke down during the tape recording, was several hours into the taping, and the last 7 pages of the tape when Lyle tries to sum up what Dr. Oziel wants and what makes me believe it was the last tape. Now, what was your reason for meeting with Dr. Oziel on December the 11th of 1989? He had been arranged with the appointment had been arranged with Dr. Oziel that we would meet and make this tape for him. When was it arranged that you would meet with him and make this tape? I got a phone call over Thanksgiving, him telling me that he was very comfortable with the fact that we hadn't seen him in several weeks. It was not in our best interest for him to feel uncomfortable. So he emails them and says, I'm very uncomfortable that we haven't spoken, and it's not in your best interest to make me feel uncomfortable. AKA coercion, blackmail, something along those lines, that he's trying to threaten the brothers in some way. You don't want to make me uncomfortable. Got to come see me. That he could go to the police with the information that we were responsible for the killings. We flew back to California and met up with him together, and he said we arranged for the tape. I think it was like the 6th of December, maybe the 8th, a few days before the 11th. So you had previously admitted to Dr. Oziel prior to the December 11th tape that you had killed your parents. Is that correct? I told him that on October 31st. Was October 3rd, the 31st, the first meeting that you had with Dr. Oziel after killing your parents? No. I saw him, I think, 3 consecutive days in the week after my parents died, in terms of saw him, meaning he came to the hotel, he went to the memorial service. So he wasn't really treating him. He was just there. But he also charged him fully for his time spent there as well. In those 2 meetings that you saw him, you did not focus the killing of your parents. Is that correct? Right. It wasn't a sit down meeting. He was in the hotel. Our family was there. Sometimes he would pull us over to the side and say something, or he was at the memorial service. It was more informal. And you had no need to reveal to him at that time that you had killed your parents. Is that correct? I had a great burden of this knowledge, and I didn't want to tell him. I didn't want to. I didn't want to tell anyone at that time. And then on October what date did you say it was in October when you revealed? October 31st. And on that date, you revealed to him that you had killed your parents. Is that correct? Yes. Why did you reveal to him on that date that you had killed your parents? I had gone to him because I just no longer wanted to live, and I had begun to have dreams about dying and being happy with dad. And so I was my cousin Henry was concerned and told me that, and I was telling him about these dreams and what I intended, that he wanted me to go to Dr. Oziel. I agreed that maybe Dr. Oziel could help me, and I went to him. And when I was in the session and I was telling Dr. Oziel about these dreams and about how I no longer wanted to live in that and the pain of the killings, he wasn't getting it. He wasn't understanding why I would be in so much pain if I had just come up upon the scene. And so I would object at this point. The answer is non-responsive at this point, says Mr. Khan. The court says, ask your next question. Like, no, you're not going to strike that. Mr. Khan says, sometime prior to October the 31st, did you learn that the Los Angeles Times was going to be running a story about the possibility that Lyle Menendez was involved in the killing of your parents? Objection calls for hearsay. Abramson says, Your Honor, we'd like to approach. The court says, okay, we'll have a brief conversation. So we're going to have a little sidebar. Ms. Abramson says, so naughty, you're so naughty. The court says, yes. Ms. Abramson says, it was my and Mr. Gessler's collective understanding that the whole reference that was excluded by the court. Mr. Gessler says, particularly by Mr. Khan's comment to the court just a few minutes ago in this very hallway, that he was familiar with the court's prior rulings and would abide by those. Court says, Mr. Khan. Ms. Abramson says, this is hearsay on hearsay. And Mr. Khan says, this only goes to his state of mind, why he was going to Oziel. This didn't come in our people's case in chief, but now he's taking statements concerning going to Oziel on that particular day. And if he had knowledge that the Los Angeles Times was going to be running a story about the involvement of Lyle, then that goes to the reason why he went to see Oziel. Ms. Abramson says, that's total speculation. You have no way to prove that. He's never said that had any effect of going to Mr. Oziel. You have no proof of that fact. The court says, wait. He certainly can ask any question about having to prove what your client's answer will be. Ms. Abramson says it's double hearsay. Court says, wait. The issue is that you're bringing in hearsay involving what was an article or possibly an article. There was some litigation about that. Ms. Abramson says, and the only way he knows about it. The court says, wait. I really am talking about at the moment. Just shuts her down. And there was litigation about that, and it had to do, as I recall it, with the reaction of Erik Menendez to Zoeller in regards to this. I don't recall it being brought out in any motions, quite frankly, in relationship to whether the prosecution would be foreclosed from asking the defendant directly about this as to if he was aware of it in regards to the timing of his meeting with Oziel. It had to do primarily with Zoller's describing a reaction, a non-reaction, whatever he did, your client's reaction to what Zoller said. That's my recollection that there was some interaction between Zoller and Erik Menendez, nothing to do with a direct question to Erik. Hold on, my mouth is so dry. That's better. Okay. Ms. Abramson says, but it still has to do with the fact that he's not brought out this information that there's some hearsay, uh, a sometimes article that's implicating Lyle Menendez, which of course there never was any. The court says, was there such an article? Ms. Abramson says there was a long article about the case, but you can't call it implicating Lyle Menendez. The court says, was it favorable to him or was it implicating? Ms. Amerson says it wasn't even out yet as of October 31st. He had no way to know anything about it except Zoller came and told him there was going to be an article that supposedly implicated Lyle Menendez. The article wasn't out yet. I don't think it came out till December. Court says, okay, but you're saying Zoller came to Erik Menendez before October 31st and told him? I don't recall, says Ms. Amerson, October 23rd. Mr. Khan says, right, there was a conversation about a week before, I think it was the 24th. There was a conversation about a week before in which he told him of this article coming out. Court says, why can't it be rephrased that Zoller told him that there was an LA Times article in preparation about the case? Mr. Khan says, okay. The court says, without reference to, Ms. Abramson says, he asked him, what were your reasons to go to Oziel? He can ask him what he really is trying to get at. What he's really trying to do is put an inference in front of the jury that he can't prove. Did the fact that there was going to be a Los Angeles Times article have anything to do with going to Oziel? The answer is no. The court says he can ask the question. He's not bound by your answer, and the jury can consider it. Ms. Abramson says it's the way he's asking the question. The court says no, the jury is certainly entitled to consider the fact that Zoller told him that there was going to be an article about the case, and then within what you're saying, a week of that notice, he went to Oziel. But so what? There's nothing in the discussion with Oziel, even of October 31st, having to do with an article about the case. The court says that's right, but your client has given certain reasons why he went to Oziel. Ms. Amerson says no one says they discussed the article. The court says no one says they had a talk about the article, just as to his reasons to going to see Dr. Oziel. Ms. Abramson says, I don't see the logical connection that because there's going to be an article about it, it makes you go see your therapist. The court says, no one said there was logic in it, but the people certainly have a right to challenge his answers as to why he went to see Oziel. And since it's not in dispute that Zoller talked to Erik Menendez prior to that time about an article in the LA Times, it certainly is inappropriate without going into the content of the article and any hearsay content of it, but just the fact that there was a conversation with Zoller, and it's up to the jury to decide whether or not that motivated him to see Oziel. All right, so let's proceed. So once again, he rules in favor of the prosecution. Big surprise. Ms. Abramson says, could we, however, have counsel approach before he goes into one of those areas where there's been litigation? We've asked this many times. The court says, If you could do that so that we don't have the hearings interrupting the testimony, it's not good for either side. Mr. Khan says the other thing we need to get into then is in regard to the list of things that they designated denials by the defendant, there was at least one. The court says, "Are you going to do that this morning? It's quarter to 12." Mr. Khan says, "No." Court says, "Let's talk about it before we start up again. Let's clear this up." Ms. Abramson says, "Why don't you tell Barry what it is and we can do it over the lunch hour?" Court says, "Let's keep going." Now we are resuming with the jury. The court says, "All right, the objection is sustained and the answer is stricken. You may proceed." Mr. Khan says, "Thank you. Sometime prior to going to see Dr. Oziel on October the 31st of 1989, did you become aware through a conversation with Detective Zoeller of the preparation of an article being written?" I guess it was through Detective Zoeller. At some point I learned about an article that was going to be written about Lyle. Okay, and how long before you went to see Dr. Oziel did you become aware of this article? If I learned it from Detective Zoeller, then it was sometime in October when Detective Zoeller was driving by the house and stopped, and we had a conversation, and then he came in. Do you recall that being approximately 1 week before you went to see Dr. Oziel? A week and a half before, right around there. I don't remember the exact date. Now, up until the time that you killed your parents on August the 20th, up until the time that Detective Zoller came to see you in late October, you made no efforts to see Dr. Oziel. Is that correct? I lost the question. Between the time I saw Dr. Oziel and saw him in October 31st? From the time that you killed your parents on August the 20th of 1989 up until the time that Detective Zoller came to see you in late October and told you about the article that might come out, you made no efforts to see Dr. Oziel. Is that correct? Right, but what does one have to do with the other? The answer is correct. Yes, but it's a stupid question because it had nothing to do with anything. I hope they clear that up again on direct or redirect. And then once you learned from Detective Zoller of the article, you made an appointment to see Dr. Oziel. Is that correct? Objection argumentative overruled. I didn't go see Dr. Oziel because the LA Times was running an article. Mr. Khan says, the question is, Mr. Menendez, is it true that it was only after you learned from Detective Zoller that the LA Times was running an article that you decided to set up an appointment with Dr. Oziel? Because the LA Times was running an article? Mr. Menendez, I am not asking you the reason why. Objection to counsel's comment. He can rephrase the question. The court says he's clarifying the question. The question doesn't ask why you saw Oziel. Was it after? The witness says, yes, yes, sir. Mr. Levin says, objection, Your Honor. The question is, it's only after. It assumes that's why it's misleading. The court says the question was, this is totally improper. I cannot believe that the court is letting the prosecution do this. He's absolutely making it seem like that's the only reason why he was going to see the therapist when there's no correlation. There's no reason for you to think of that correlation, but they're trying to like, and he just said twice now, basically stating I didn't do it for that. And he's like questioning, like, why are you equating the two? Like, I don't understand. So he's struggling with why are the two related? Because one did not trigger the other, as the prosecution is trying to make it seem. The court says the question was, after Zoller told you about this article that might be published, did you make an appointment to see Oziel? The witness says, right. It was after I had talked to Detective Zoller. Mr. Khan says, now, how long after Detective Zoller told you that an article might be published in the Times was about your brother did you set up an appointment to see Oziel? I think it was, if I saw Detective Zoller a week and a half before, then it was a week and a half later that I made the appointment with Dr. Oziel about, I think it was a day beforehand. And you said it was between 1 week to 1.5 or to a week and a half before the appointment that you spoke to Detective Zoeller. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And so had you been having dreams about dying prior to the time that Detective Zoeller told you about the article coming out in the Los Angeles Times? Yes, but the specific dream that I remembered happened was after I met with Detective Zoeller. It was the night before I spoke to my cousin Henry. So it was after you learned that Detective Zoeller, after you learned on the article coming out that you had a dream, which caused you to set up an appointment with Dr. Oziel. Is that correct? One of the dreams happened after I met with Detective Zoeller, yes. And it was that dream which caused you to set up an appointment with Dr. Oziel. Is that correct? Yes. Now, were you concerned at the time that you set up the appointment with Dr. Oziel on October the 31st that the police might be making an arrest? I'm sorry? I lost the beginning of the question. Were you concerned at the time that you set up the appointment with Dr. Oziel that the police might be arresting you or your brother sometime soon? Objection calls for speculation unless it's limited to his state of mind. The court says that's the way the question is phrased. The witness says, well, Detective Zoeller told me when I met with him, or when I met him late October of that, although the LA Times suspected that Lyle and I had done this, that he did not suspect me. I didn't really believe him. I thought that he did suspect us, and he was just saying that because he was going to tell me that, like try to play the two off of one another, like bad cop, good cop type of thing. I didn't think that. I'm not sure. I thought that there would be an arrest soon. Thought that they suspected us, but I didn't know if they were going to arrest us at that point. Mr. Khan says, but you believed at that time that he spoke to you that he did, in fact, suspect you of being involved in the killing of your parents. Is that correct? Right. I had suspected that from the September 17th statement. And now you learned that there was going to be an article in which some suspicion was going to be pointed at your brother. Is that correct? Objection assumes facts, not an evidence. It also calls for hearsay. The court says, well, he's already answered it in a different way himself in his own testimony regarding what Detective Zoeller told him, so overruled. The question was about an article? Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, I object. Could the question be reread by the reporter to the witness? The court says, Why don't you re-ask it? Mr. Khan says, Yes. After speaking to Detective Zoeller, did you have some concern that there was suspicion of involvement that was going to be directed towards your brother? I knew that at that point, I knew that the LA Times was planning on writing an article that said that my brother and I may have been responsible for my parents' deaths. Okay, so were you concerned at that point about law enforcement catching up with you? Is that correct? The fact that the LA Times, Detective Zoeller already knew about the LA Times article, so I wouldn't worry about the article coming out and therefore Detective Zoeller becoming aware of it. I didn't think that the LA Times reporters had any more information than Detective Zoeller. But you didn't believe Detective Zoeller was being truthful when being truthful with you when he told you that you were not a suspect, did you? No, I believed that he was just saying that so that I wouldn't. Yes. And you didn't know that the article was going to be including in it, or that you didn't know what the article was going to include in it because you had no advance copy of the article, did you? No, I think I knew what the article was going to include. And how did you know that? I think Detective Zoeller told me that. I may be confusing the knowledge I have of actually seeing the article versus what Detective Zoeller said, but I thought I knew what the LA Times reporters were planning on writing. You felt that there was some evidence that was going to be revealed publicly that you and your brother were involved in the killings of your parents. Is that correct? Objection. It's argumentative and misstates his testimony. No, that's not what I'm saying. Overruled, the answer will stand. Mr. Khan asks, you did not believe that the Los Angeles Times would be referring to evidence tying you to the killings of your parents? No. What did you believe the article was going to be about? Just a mere suspicion with no evidence? Objection would call for hearsay. It's confusing where he got the knowledge from. Court says sustained as to the latter objection. Mr. Khan says, just directing your attention to the information that you received from Detective Zoeller, did you have the impression that the Los Angeles Times would be writing about evidence pointing to your involvement? Right. Detective Zoeller said that he had spoken with reporters, and all the information I got about that was going to be written in the LA Times. I didn't believe they were going to cite evidence. If there was evidence that was linking us, we would have already been arrested. I can imagine. But I know that it was Detective Zoller just warning me ahead of time that this article was coming out, not to worry, that he knew what was being written in the article and that he did not suspect that we had done this with me, not to worry about that. What was your understanding of how that article was going to link you and your brother to the killings of your parents? Mr. Levin says, objection, it assumes facts, not an evidence, and it's irrelevant. Sustained. Was it your understanding that the article was going to link you and your brother to the killings of your parents? To say that there was a possibility we were responsible? And was it your understanding that the article was going to say nothing more than the mere possibility that you were involved without reference to any evidence whatsoever? Objection, it would call for speculation. Sustained. I think we've gone beyond what it was that the offer here as far as the conversation with Detective Zoller. Mr. Khan says, now, after you had the conversation with Detective Zoller, did you notify your brother about the article coming out? Objection, it would call for hearsay. Overruled, says the court. The witness says, I believe so. Mr. Khan asks, did you feel that this was a matter of concern to you and your brother? Certainly, in terms of a large newspaper like the LA Times writing a big story about my brother and I being responsible for the killings and everyone in my family beginning to wonder why the article was written was a concern, and I talked to Lyle about it. Did you feel that you should let your brother know that perhaps this might lead to renewed interest on the part of the Beverly Hills Police Department as to whether you were responsible for the killings? No, Detective Zoller had told me just the opposite. He knew the article was coming out, and he's the one that told me about the article. I didn't think the article would suddenly give Detective Zoller any ideas that he didn't already know. Exactly. But you told us that you didn't believe Detective Zoller, that you believed the contrary to what Detective Zoller was saying. In fact, you believed you were a suspect. Is that correct? Objection. It's argumentative as phrased. Sustained. Is it your testimony that regardless of what Detective Zoller was saying, you believed that Detective Zoller regarded you as a suspect? Well, it wasn't regardless or despite what he was saying. Detective Zoller was asked, I remember one thing he specifically asked me, which was, did Lyle leave the movie we were at to make any phone calls? He was talking to me about our alibi. And so, as much as he said that the article is coming out, not to worry about it, I still suspected that the reason that he was discussing the various points of the alibi was because he believed that we were responsible. Okay, so in light of your understanding that Detective Zoller suspected you of being involved in the killing of your parents, did you feel it was necessary to discuss with your brother the fact that now that you have a major newspaper writing about your possible involvement, this might lead to an increased suspicion on the part of the Beverly Hills Police Department? No, I didn't believe that there would be increased suspicion because of the newspaper. Lyle and I already knew that Detective Zoller suspected us, but I did want to tell Lyle what major newspaper would be writing about this fact, and that for the first time, this would be publicly suspected. But in any event, it wasn't until sometime after the phone call that you made a phone call to meet with Dr. Oziel after the killings of your parents. Is that correct? Objection asked and answered. Overruled. Yes, sir, says Erik. The court says, all right, let's take our break here. We're at the noon hour. We'll resume at 1:30. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll resume at 1:30. And they go on their lunch break. And that is where we're going to end here. So, as you are watching this, it is Sunday, May 31st. And enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Or maybe you're watching it later. Maybe you didn't watch it right when it came out, but this will come out Sunday. So enjoy the rest of your weekend if you are watching it on the weekend. And if not, enjoy your day, the rest of your day. I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye. That's the end of this Trial Transcripts Exposed. Thanks for following along with me. Like if you want more, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. See you next time.